The Detroit Lions travel to Minnesota this weekend for a battle that could decide the NFC's number one seed. And what is arguably the most important game of the Detroit Lions season up to this point, they traveled to an undefeated Minnesota team coming off a bye week, coming off a chance to have a full extra week of game planning time. And on top of that, they are on the road. Odds seem stacked against the Lions this weekend, but I do think that they have a chance. They are a very well constructed team coming off a massive victory on the road in Dallas, and there's a good chance that they walk into Minnesota and do exactly what they did a season ago. This game has massive playoff implications for both sides, with Minnesota, of course, looking for an effective 3-game lead in the division, while the Detroit Lions look to take first place in that NFC North race while becoming the number one seed in the NFC playoff race. Both sides have a lot to play for. Both sides are going to look to win this game, and both sides are likely looking at this as a playoff matchup for home field advantage. With that being said, today we're going to take a look at this game. We're going to take a look at all of the statistics, all of the players, all of the scenarios surrounding this football game, talk about which team will walk out the victor. Now, taking a look at the last couple of games and the forms that these teams have been in, the Minnesota Vikings are, of course, undefeated. 5-0, coming off a bye week in Week 6, with their most recent victory coming at the hands of the New York Jets in London by a score of 23-17. The Detroit Lions stand at 4-1 on the season, which is a sole loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Their last game, a victory in Dallas by a score of 47-9, a complete blowout in Jerry World, which now sees the Detroit Lions sit with the second highest winning percentage in the entirety of the NFC. As I already mentioned, the winner of this game becomes the number one seed in the playoff race, the number one seed for home field advantage, getting a bye week in the playoffs, and of course hosting the NFL playoffs until they are eliminated from the race. This game is massive for both teams. As I mentioned, the Minnesota Vikings with a victory moved to 6-0. Which is obviously impressive and great for them, but the Detroit Lions, as well as the rest of the NFC North, moved to 4-2, essentially giving them a 3-game lead over the rest of the division. The Lions, of course, have an opportunity to pull that back within one game with a contest later down the line, but this game is massive. If Minnesota wins this, they have a pretty cushy seat to an NFC North crown, while the Detroit Lions, even with a victory, are now tied with Minnesota and have no room for error. Now, taking a look at both teams' offenses, they have been really good. The Detroit Lions rank as the third passing attack in the entirety of the NFL, while Minnesota sits at just the 19th passing attack in all of football. Detroit sits as the fourth best rushing team in the NFL, while Minnesota is all the way down below average in the NFL with just the 20th ranked rushing offense. However, despite Minnesota's inability to move the ball efficiently, they still rank as the fifth highest scoring offense in the NFL, averaging 27.8 points per game, but the Detroit Lions have them beat. While averaging 30.2 points per game, the Detroit Lions are the number one scoring offense in all of football. So both teams are very good at putting the ball in the end zone. Both teams are very good at putting up points, but the Detroit Lions move the ball significantly better. They move the ball better through the air. They move the ball better on the ground. And while the Minnesota Vikings do score a lot of points, some of their points are set up by the defense, right? The takeaways set them up in the red zone. The defense has directly contributed several touchdowns on the season and has put together a really good performance so far. So while the Minnesota Vikings do have a very high scoring offense, they really haven't been that efficient over the NFL season. Their passing attack has gone 3 and out, has not maintained possessions at a rate that the Minnesota Vikings would expect, and their rushing offense hasn't been nearly as good as they were hoping. But of course, when you're putting up 27 points a game, it is pretty easy to maintain a winning streak. Defensively, the Detroit Lions rank as the 27th passing defense in the NFL, while the Minnesota Vikings rank as the 30th passing defense in the NFL. Now, despite their 30th ranking, I did feel it was important to mention that they are ranked 4th in the NFL in sacks. Their outside linebackers and their edge rush has been phenomenal to start the season. Andrew Van Ginkel and the rest of those free agents that they brought in throughout the offseason have been instrumental to their success on the defensive side of the ball. So while the secondary is giving up a lot of yards through the air, their pass rush is getting home nearly as much as any other team in football. The Detroit Lions rank as the third rushing defense in football as they continue to be elite in that category. But Minnesota, surprisingly, has the second best run defense in all of football, while they have the third best scoring defense in all of football, allowing just 15.2 points per game. While the Detroit Lions still are within the top 10, ranking 8th in scoring defense with 18.2 points per game. So the Detroit Lions are a better offense that put up better numbers, but the Minnesota Vikings are probably a better defense. Both teams struggling with the passing defense, but both teams elite in the run defense and top 10 in scoring defense within the NFL. These are truly two of the top teams in the NFC, and neither of these teams is at the top due to a fluke. This is not the 2023 Minnesota Vikings or the 2022 Minnesota Vikings where they went 13-3 but had a negative point differential. Both of these teams are legit contenders and legit playoff teams. They are very, very good, and both of these teams have a case for Sunday's contest. Now, looking at the injury report, I think the Lions have a little bit more to lose this week. Of course, playing their first full game without Aiden Hutchinson is going to be an adjustment period. The Lions lose arguably the best defensive player in all of football, a player that was the favorite for Defensive Player of the Year, leading the NFL in sacks and on a historic pace with pressures and pass rushing win rate. Their number one cornerback left the Dallas game just 2 plays after Aiden Hutchinson did. After being kicked in the head, he is not practiced. Carlton Davis has not been at practice either Wednesday or Thursday, and there's a good chance that he does not play in the contest versus Minnesota. That means either Ennis Rakestraw or potentially Kendall Vilder will have to step up in his place, which would, of course, leave a massive hole on the defense when you're going against guys like Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. On the flip side, Minnesota might have more players out of the game, but I think they are slightly less impactful. Blake Cashman does lead their defense in tackles, and of course is a very, very good player. Vikings fans seem very gutted to lose him for this game, but he is yet to practice this week, and it does seem very likely that he will miss the contest. Caleb Evans, one of their starting cornerbacks, is officially out, I believe, as well, or at least is very unlikely to play in this contest, with TJ Hawkinson coming out last night saying that he probably won't play until next week versus the Colts. And Aaron Jones, being on the injury report, did not practice on Wednesday, was limited on Thursday, but we really don't have a clear image of whether or not he will start and play versus the Detroit Lions either. So Minnesota, I think, might have more injuries coming into the game, but the Detroit Lions, in my opinion, have larger impacting injuries on the defensive side of the ball specifically. Key matchups for this game, the Lions have to stop Justin Jefferson. Justin Jefferson over the last 3 games has nearly single-handedly kept the Minnesota Vikings in each and every one of these games versus the Lions. His last game versus the Lions, 12 receptions, 192 yards and a touchdown. The game before that, 6 receptions, 141 yards and a touchdown. And the game before that, a career-high 11 receptions, 223 yards, but did not find the end zone. On the offensive side of the ball, the Detroit Lions have to watch out for the Minnesota pass rush. 12 sacks from their 3 linebackers. Dallas Turner is not included in that, but is, of course, still very dangerous on the defensive side of the ball. And Brian Flores has this Minnesota defense humming. He has them as one of the top units in the NFL, one of the best pass rushes in the NFL. And if Jared Goff cannot get protected, if Jared Goff does not get time in the pocket, this could be a very, very tough game for the Lions to win. I look back to Thanksgiving last year for the Detroit Lions, the last time a pass rush truly dominated the Detroit Lions offensive line, and Jared Goff struggled. They gave up a defensive touchdown. They lost that game, and they struggled mightily. If the Minnesota Vikings can get home and consistently get pressure, there's a good chance we see a repeat of that offensive performance. But if the Lions can keep Jared Goff clean, I do think he can put up good numbers versus this Minnesota secondary. And I do still believe, despite Minnesota's top run game, that the Detroit Lions will be able to at least be somewhat efficient on the ground, even if it is not their best days. On the other side of the ball, the Minnesota Vikings have to watch out for Amon-Ra St. Brown. In his last 2 contests, he went 7 receptions, 144 yards, and a touchdown. And then in Minnesota last time, went 12 receptions for 106 yards and a touchdown through the air. Minnesota has never in his entire career held Amon-Ra St. Brown to below 65 receiving yards. And he's been a massive part of their offensive success in Minnesota over the last several seasons. The Lions' run defense is also phenomenal. Minnesota doesn't run the ball especially well, even with Aaron Jones and their strong offensive line. And the Detroit Lions' run defense has been about as good as you could expect. In week 1 versus Kyron Williams and the Rams, they allowed 83 rushing yards. In week 2 versus Tampa Bay, they allowed just 70 rushing yards, including Baker Mayfield's scrambles, where I believe he scrambled for about 20 or 30 yards on the ground. Week 3, Arizona versus the Cardinals, and a great dynamic quarterback in Kyler Murray, they allowed 77 rushing yards. Week 4 against Seattle, probably their worst rushing defensive performance since the NFC Championship game. And if you want to talk about the regular season, probably their worst rushing game allowed since 2022 versus Carolina. They allowed 133 rushing yards in that game to Kenneth Walker. And then, of course, in week 6, they come out against Dallas. They have their best rushing defensive performance, allowing 53 yards on the ground versus Dak Prescott, Rico Dowdle, and Ezekiel Elliott. Their rushing defense is phenomenal. And with Minnesota not being able to run the ball super efficiently, the Detroit Lions are going to try to make Minnesota one-dimensional. They might not get home through the pass rush, but their run defense should still be among the top of the NFL. If they can force Minnesota to not run the ball very often and not run the ball very well, that puts a lot on the shoulders of Sam Darnold, a lot on the shoulders of guys like Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson. It makes the Minnesota Vikings one-dimensional, and if you can make a team one-dimensional, it makes them very hard to win. If you force Sam Darnold to have to throw 4 touchdowns in a game to win, the Minnesota Vikings probably aren't going to win. If you force any quarterback to have to throw 4 touchdowns just to put up 28 points, you're probably not going to win that game. And that has been the Lions' recipe to success this year. They've shut down the run. They don't allow rushing touchdowns. They take the football away when it's crucial and in big moments. And that's how they've won their games. That is the formula they're going to try to win with this week. I do think if they can shut down Minnesota's run defense, they will have a good chance to intercept Sam Darnold at least once, maybe twice, and of course take the football away and force Sam Darnold to win the game without help from the scheme and without help from play action. With all of that being said, I do think the Detroit Lions win this game. I know Minnesota's coming off a bye. I know they're more well-rested. I know they've had more preparation time. And, of course, I know they are the home field advantage without Aiden Hutchinson. But I do think that Minnesota is a beatable football team. They have had 3 of their 5 contests be within 7 points. So it's not as if they're blowing out every single opponent that they've had. They did blow out Houston, but that was kind of a one-off game. They are a beatable football team. And I think with the more consistent offense, the better passing offense, and the better rushing offense, the Detroit Lions will find a way to squeak out this game. They may not get 2 to 3 sacks in this game, but I do think they will force an interception or 2. I do believe the run defense will still continue to be great. And I think if the Detroit Lions can make Minnesota one-dimensional, force Sam Darnold to pass the ball 20, 30, 40, 50 times in the game, much like Nick Mullins did a season ago, he might put up great numbers. He might throw for 300, 400 yards, might throw for 3, 4 touchdowns, but if the Lions can force a turnover or 2, if they can take the football away and just be efficient on offense, I think that efficiency will be the difference in the game. And I do think the Detroit Lions will down the Minnesota Vikings to make for a very entertaining Sunday afternoon. So with that being said, that is all I have for you guys today. I think this game will be a dogfight. I could see either team winning this game, and there are cases to be made for either football team at this point. I still think the Detroit Lions are a better constructed football team than the Minnesota Vikings. I think they are a little deeper, and I think they are a little more talented. But Minnesota is on a hot streak. They're coming off a bye week. They have more prep time. They're healthier. And I think it is going to be a very, very fun matchup. Let me know down in the comments below what you think about this matchup, who you think is going to win, and how you think this contest plays out. I'd be curious to hear what your guys' opinions are. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so very much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.